Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to OTA on the Air, another episode for you. We have with us today Steve Bryan, who formerly was the founder of Vigillo and was purchased out by Samba Safety. And he is a serial entrepreneur, someone who started off his career in the educational tech environment and came into trucking. And we'll have him tell that story here in a second. So, Steve, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, Steve is one of our keynote speakers. He'll be the Tuesday morning speaker at our annual conference, September 21st and 22nd. The OTA Annual Conference is presented by Pilot Flying J, and we appreciate their support. It is an in-person event as well as a virtual event, so please feel free to sign up for whichever venue serves you best. We're very excited about it. And we're very excited to actually put on a conference and have some folks get together. So Steve, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your history and then how you got involved in the trucking industry?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah. And by the way, I'm really excited about the conference. You know, I have, as I think a lot of us, have not done much in-person anything, since about the middle of March. So I'm super excited to get up there and spend time with you and your group. So looking forward to that. Yeah. So I had the great fortune to be introduced to the trucking industry. It was early 2007, and I had just ended an engagement with another company that I had been an investor in and then became an employee of, but I was not the boss. And after a couple of years with that, in that situation, I decided to, the entrepreneur side of me kicked in. And so I decided to leave that company and look for another startup, which was my fifth. So I've done 5, including Vigillo, 5 software startups going back to the late 80s. Anyway, I early in 2007, my wife and I had a dinner date with another couple. The ladies were pretty familiar with each other. Our kids went to high school together. I didn't know the gentleman that well, other than to say hi to him at a football game. But we all got together, and I had just left this other company, and I didn't know much about him. All I knew was he was a lawyer, and I thought, I'm going to fight through this dinner with a lawyer, right? And anyway, we got to chatting, and I explained my situation, and that what I really liked about my previous gig was we were getting into compliance management. So things in other areas, other industries, Sarbanes-Oxley, Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, and things like that. And I really thought, the growing use of online software as a service, that was kind of new back then. People were leery of, wait a minute, my software's out in some cloud somewhere. I don't really get that. How's that work? So that's kind of the state of the world. But I like the idea of using that to help with complex compliance issues. So I was having that conversation with this gentleman, and he said, well, you should look at the trucking industry. Like, the what now? That's an industry? Like, that's a thing? Well, it turns out I came to learn he's actually one of the top defense attorneys in the trucking industry. So I began a research project, dug into it a little bit, and then later that year, actually June 1st of 2007, I started Vigillo, and we jumped in and started looking for ways to, serve the industry, to help manage compliance better. And that's when we tripped over ourselves and fell into the dawn of the CSA program, which was just entering kind of pilot testing at the time. And we were fortunate to have a team in place at the right place, right time. And CSA became our focal point, and we never looked back. That's kind of what Vigillo became known for, was really helping motor carriers to understand the data and the techniques and the different strategies and tactics for managing this complex data in an effort to control CSA scores. That's what we did for 10 years, and then Samba acquired us in 2017, just about exactly 10 years after we started. And as some of you may know, I left Samba just less than a month ago, about 3 weeks ago, and I'm now maybe looking at number 6. We'll see.
So where did the name Vigillo come from?
So I made that up. That was one of those cocktail napkin kind of moments. I don't know. I've always, Tom, had a kind of an affinity for things from like I've done a lot of things that are named after, you know, characters or events or language from Greek mythology and old Latin. Now, I don't speak Latin. I don't know any of this stuff. I just find it interesting. So Vigillo is actually means Latin for vigilant. So it's the root of our word vigilant. And I thought that worked well for what we were trying to do, was, you know, give tools to the industry to help them be vigilant on what turned out to be these CSA scores. So we have a funny little story there. The word actually is Vigilo. That's the proper Latin word. I discovered at the time that Vigillo.com, spelled that way, was already in use by a group of British ex-special forces guys that had formed a security company. And they were going by Vigillo.com with one L. So rather than fight those guys, I didn't want to get in a fight with a bunch of ex-special ops guys. So I added an L. I took a little artistic license and made it with two L's, and off we went.
That's a good move.
I never heard from him, so I guess that worked out.
That's good. That's good. So from your from your vast body of experience, like, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing the industry in the wake of COVID-19?
Oh, wow. Yeah, what a great question. A lot of them. But, you know, here's what I'd like to just say to start with is, it's not necessarily a challenge, it's more of a recognition. I think a lot of us in the industry very quickly came to appreciate what I'm going to call the hero status of our truckers. You know, when all of us were shutting down and staying home and worried about what the future looked like, and we all know, you know, what the economy and unemployment and a lot of really scary and troubling things happening. And through it all, this nation's trucking industry just stepped up. And I just think there's so much, there has been, I hope it continues on into the future. I think there's a level of appreciation and recognition for the truckers that never existed before. So call that, I'm not sure it fits the word challenge, but it certainly is an outcome of COVID that I hope continues, is that high level of respect and recognition for the truckers that kept food on our table. And, you know, they didn't quite come through with the toilet paper there for a while, but, you know, everything else we kept right on going. So appreciation there. So here's what I'd say. You know, a lot of challenges, obviously, just, you know, staying healthy, being out on the road. How do they go in and out of their family environments, you know, at a time when none of us, we still don't really truly understand maybe the exact right way to deal with this. I mean, there's lots of strategies. We're all wearing masks and staying apart, but, you know, these truckers were out there at a time when I'm not sure, you know, we knew. I remember in the early days, we were told, don't wear masks. So, you know, I really have a lot of appreciation for them. I think, just to bring it back more to my wheelhouse and talk a little bit about data, one of the big challenges, and again, this just ties back to CSA, is, you know, as the world shut down, one of the groups that also shut down, slowed way down anyway, is law enforcement, commercial law enforcement. So one of the things I'd been tracking over the summer, and it's dramatic, is the decrease in the number of roadside inspections that are conducted, and therefore the decrease in, you know, violations and their associated CSA points, you know, that no longer flow into the system. So we've been tracking that. That's one of the things I think we'll dig into a little bit at the live conference, is just how dramatic that is. And that's causing some very strange behavior in people's CSA scores, ups and downs, and literally some scores are just simply disappearing for lack of data sufficiency now. So look, nothing against law enforcement. They also, you know, had to back off on some of their, you know, more face-to-face kind of encounters. But one of the challenges now is, how do we get back out of that and get that data flowing again and keep the system viable? So there's road check is coming up here in a week or so. Maybe that, I'm looking at that as hopefully, maybe that's us kicking back off and getting that. I know motor carriers may not like to hear this, but we need those inspections to happen. It's good for the industry.
Oh, without question. And I think that's probably the you know, we have for so many years tried to avoid getting inspected. And, you know, I remember real early on when, you know, law enforcement wasn't writing up clean inspections.
Yeah.
And that created a problem in CSA. So let's kind of flip onto that into that mode. So do you feel, you've been knee deep in CSA since the beginning, do you think that CSA has failed the industry? And if so, how can it be fixed?
Yeah. I think, Tom, I was knee deep in it on a light day, maybe up to about a year, I felt like most days. So and I think most people agree with this. So this is my opinion, and I think it's also shared by a lot of the folks in the industry, ATA and others like that, that look, a system of data-driven scoring or evaluation of the industry for safety is a good thing. We need something like that. And CSA that concept, I think, was positive. That was a good idea to go out and gather data. And of course, we had SafeStat as its predecessor, so it wasn't without, some precedent. But CSA was going to use more data. It was more scientific, going to be a better scoring system. So from that perspective, CSA, I think, tried to be good. It just from the very beginning had a lot of defects and a lot of shortcomings, and identified safe carriers as unsafe and vice versa. And I mean, that's really what we at Vigillo talked about for over a decade, was what's wrong with this system and how can we make it better? So it was kind of a constant tug of war with the FMCSA, who's less enamored of change, I'll just say. And so there was a lot of struggles there to continue to improve on the system. So I wouldn't say CSA has failed the industry, but it could have been better. And with more collaboration between the industry and the agency, I think it could have been far better. Obviously, I think, we got to this whole new model, this item response theory, IRT, if you wanted to go into that. I think that was an improvement that has gone slower than I think many of us would have liked to see. So, again, scoring is good. This particular system still has today a lot of room for improvement.
Well, let's dive into that. So I guess talk to the audience a little bit about the IRT model revisions and the work that's being done on that.
Yeah. So we're coming up, just a little history lesson. For guys like me, love this stuff. So hopefully everybody's not falling asleep, but still morning in the Pacific time zone, by the way. I'm still got my coffee here. So we're just short of 5 years since the FAST Act was signed by then President Obama. And part of that, which was largely, as we all know, a kind of a highway infrastructure funding bill, but buried in that was what we called the CSA reform language. So it was directing FMCSA to retain the services of a group called the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine out of DC, a kind of a nonprofit think tank. I came to have a lot of respect for them. I think they did a really good job in the process. But that started almost 5 years ago. That was December of 2015 when the FAST Act was signed into law. And so here we are coming up on 5 years, and we still haven't really done anything, So I will make without reservation, I was a big fan of what the academies did and their recommendation to look at this what I will call a time-tested, battle-tested statistical model called item response theory. It's widely used. It's been in use. It's not some new fancy data science thing that we have to go figure out. It's been in use for decades in education, testing, college entrance exams, things like that. IQ tests are based on IRT. Credit scores are based on IRT. It's a well-known statistical model. So I like the idea of using it. The FAST Act called for a certain timeline to roll that out, and we're way past that. We have missed every timeline, and I have some opinions as to where I think it stands. Our friends at Scopolitas just wrote a blog a few weeks ago that I think nailed it. It's not great news. I think it continues. I won't call it IRT dead, but it's in a coma. It's on life support, and we're trying to figure out how to bring it back.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what we see, and when you've got the unfortunate part is DC seems to be in this mentality of not getting anything done, and when the industries that they serve need this stuff done, and that's always been a challenge, is that the when they don't want to do something, they just choose not to do it. It's an amazing phenomenon to me. So I guess talk a little bit about the Scopelitis blog and your thoughts on what happens to IRT. Is it something that is actually something that can be revived?
Well, in my opinion, it absolutely can, Tom. I think it can, and I think it should be. And I think it should have been, if it had been on schedule, we'd have been looking at this now for close to 2 years. So here's where, I think if I was, ruled the world, it turns out I don't, I keep getting reminded of that, but, I think it could have been rolled out. We did this with, there was a huge change, a lot of you might remember, in the CSA program in 2012. And when they reconstructed what the basics were, and they moved a whole bunch of violations around. And for about 90 days, they ran those two systems side by side in a pretty transparent way, so that every motor carrier could see, okay, well, here's how I am under the old system. Here's what I'd look like under the new system. I cannot imagine why we didn't do that with IRT and get it out there. Look, maybe we all would have decided, no, it doesn't work for these reasons or that reason. I don't think that's where we would have been. I think we all would have gotten comfortable with it and said, okay, it's very different. We have to relearn a lot of things, but let's look at them side by side. But that has never happened. It's just, it's what I call, to use I'll steal a current, I don't want to get political here, but IRT right now is living in Joe's basement, and it's not coming out. So I think it ought to come out. We ought to shine some light on it and all have a chance to look at it. And if it goes forward and it looks like it's a better way, great, let's use it. If for reasons it doesn't, fine, let's all agree it won't. But I don't think having it in the dark at the FMCSA and having it just be, kept quiet is the right way to approach it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree, and it's always a challenge. In fact, I had worked on an issue with Class A and Class B CDLs, and it was funny because I fought that battle for years with a particular staff member at FMCSA, and he retired, and magically the new person said, yeah, that makes complete sense, and changed it. And so let's hope that there's a changing of the guard means that there is a changing of some philosophy and in that look at that model. So so a few years ago, Vigillo got very active, and I thought that was hands down the right move to address crash accountability, something that the industry had been struggling with for years with the FMCSA. In fact, Ohio is the home of the famous line by Ann Farrow, is when we got rear-ended at a stoplight. She said, well, maybe your truck shouldn't have been there. That provided fault. Did the FMCSA, when they made their changes to crash about accountability, get it right?
They got it a lot better. So first of all, it's a thing now, right? So I think honestly, I think that there was some leadership provided there by Administrator Martinez and largely supported by Secretary Chow, and which now has brought us to where we at least have an official crash preventability, crash accountability review program. So, we never had that before. And to mention, past Administrator Farrow, you might remember in the spring of 2012, we got close. We got this close. And she had developed a crash review program and almost released it and then pulled it back at the last moment, I think, under pressure from certain groups that didn't want that review done. So credit to the agency and to the DOT for finally getting us to a point where we can. Motor carriers now have a process to submit those for review and have them perhaps removed from their record as a non-preventable crash. I actually wrote an article when their final proposal came out. Remember, they had a 2-year pilot test for a while, and they ran that, and then towards the end of that, they said, okay, here's what we've learned, and here's what we're going to go forward and do. So for the most part, an improvement for sure, and I think what we have today certainly is far better than nothing. There's still some very odd things in there to me. So this seems to be I don't know, it's in the DNA, I guess, of the agency, where they look at something and the first thing they do is categorize things. Like that's how they did CSA, right? Okay, step one, let's get up on a whiteboard. Okay, what's the first thing? Let's create basics, and into those will go violations. Well, there was very little science. Like you want to kind of do it the other way. Let the data lead you, right? Well, they kind of did that with the crash preventability program, both in the early one and then again when they refined it towards the end. They started with, okay, these are the categories of crashes that you will be able to submit. And if it isn't in one of these categories, it just can't, we won't look at it. So for example, the one I just shake my head at is if another motorist hits a truck in the rear, that fits a category. But if they get around to about a 45-degree angle and hit them on the side in the rear, nope, sorry, that's not in the category. So we won't even look at it. So I don't understand how a motorist who, comes careening down the highway at a high rate of speed and then, somehow hits the side of the truck instead of the rear, puts it out of a category. So there's a few of those kinds of odd categorizations, but notwithstanding that, I'd say a large percentage of the crashes that people will want to review will be able to review. I think there's still a little bit of lack of transparency in there. So they do publish their results, and you can go get those, and you'll see, okay, well, here's the crashes we've looked at, and here's the categories they're in, and here are the outcomes. We can go see that. That's good. What we don't see is the ones they refuse, the ones they turn down. We have no idea as an industry how many are going into the pipeline. We only see those that they accept and then do the reviews on. So that, to me, is a big hole in what we can see in terms of transparency. So again, there was a lot of talk about transparency back going through the CSA reform work, and I think there's always room for more of that, not less. So that's an area where I'd like to see us all be able to see the real data flowing through that process. But anyway, I think it's better than it was, and it's far better than nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an incremental step. It's interesting. I was with a member of ours who had a motorcyclist slam into the side of their truck at 100 miles an hour, and the interesting part is clearly not that company's fault, and nothing they could have done when someone's traveling at that rate of speed, but still, the CSA score will affect them just because of where he hit them at. And
where he hit on the truck. Yeah,
it's amazing. And I think that was one of the things that I was very happy about when you all had addressed yours. Is I think that there's an opportunity there for either the industry or private business to come up with a process to review these crashes, because every one of these crashes is different. There's a whole variety of things that impact those crashes and play into that scenario. And I think that the agency never wanted to get into that game of making judgment calls. But the problem is you can't just assume fault at first blush and then try to back it off. So So let's get into your wheelhouse on data. Let's talk a little bit about what has the trucking industry done to utilize the volume of data that they're starting to get. They recently found themselves in. How have we done that? What are some of the best practices that you've seen out there?
Yeah. Wow, what a world this has become. I just again go back to the beginning. I started Vigillo it was actually June 1st, 2007. I incorporated Vigillo and thought I was going to go off and do some cool stuff with the data and compliance and all that stuff. 27 days later, Steve Jobs released the iPhone, and I really think started this incredible wave of data. And of course there's a lot more than the iPhone now, but at the time it's like, holy cow, all of a sudden the deluge of data began. Now I tell people I started it, because I actually started 27 days before Steve Jobs, so I actually kicked off the data revolution. But so if you go back then, I remember we started at Vigillo, we started talking about big data and the volume and the velocity and all this stuff with these terms we used back in around 2012. And we thought, oh my gosh, I remember going and speaking at conferences and talking about the huge volume of data that existed and did all these comparisons of data today versus historically. Well, I look back now and laugh at what we were saying then in 2012, 13, 14 versus what we actually now have in 2020. I mean, it's just, we underestimated it so badly. It's sort of, comical. It's a big challenge. There's so much data out there, and more it's taking on different forms. Like it's not rows and columns. We can't fire up Excel and put it into spreadsheets and look at it. That's what a lot of us are real comfortable with. So there's, how do you deal with social media? I mean, look at the data that exists in places like Facebook and Twitter and places. There's huge value in that data, but how do you load Facebook into a spreadsheet? That's just not a compatible thing. So there are a growing number of really complex tools. They're out of most of our range of, you got to have specialists, data scientists that know how to do this stuff. So it's a big challenge. When I talk about data and how we handle it, I've always, and this is not just me, this is what the data scientists will tell you, is it's kind of a three-step process. First, you have to identify the data that you think is going to be important to you, your business or your, whatever it is you're trying to do. Identify it, because there's so much data out there, you can't look at it all. So that's step one. And then you have to acquire it. You have to get it. That's this tricky part. Like, how do I bring this data into an environment where I can then go to the third step, was analyze it, make it actionable for my company. So that's the big, when you think about attacking a big data project these days, you got to answer those questions, and you have to have strategies, and you have to have people. That's what I keep telling, the industry is, this is not, Frank juggling a spreadsheet anymore. We're way beyond that. So, if that's what you're seeing, you ought to be asking the question, are we really out far enough? And look, you don't have to be on the bleeding edge of this stuff, let others do that, but you got to at least stay with the state of the art. And the state of the art in terms of data and analytics has moved so far forward in the last, 6, 7, 8 years. It's amazing. And where it's going in the future, it just keeps accelerating. So, a lot of work, a lot of good work is done. There's a lot of great companies out there. I could name names all day long, but I don't want to out of fear of leaving somebody out. But there's some really great companies that serve this industry that do amazing things with data. So I think partnering with them is always a good thing. And I'm, again, not pitching a product, because I don't have a product anymore.
Yeah, and it is. You're true. You're 100% correct. I mean, I started off my college career in the computer science realm, and the what I was doing back then compared to what they're doing now is just amazingly different. And we were talking earlier about the trucking company that I worked for. So I mean, even 7 years ago, they were still doing their drug testing database in MS Works. So it's definitely a challenge in the industry. When we've got some kind of slow adopters, we've got some folks who have a lot of things going on in their business, and then you add this layer of complexity on top of it. Makes it a challenge. So I guess, what do you see as the next frontier in the use of that data by the trucking industry?
Yeah, so I think the answer is to me is crystal clear. It's AI, artificial intelligence. Machine learning, deep machine learning, all these crazy terms they like to throw around, but that's where we're headed. That is there are some amazing tools now coming out from all the big, the Microsofts and Oracles and IBMs of the world that are giving us the ability to look at these volumes of highly unstructured data. That's this, it's not rows and columns. It's video and audio and text and Facebook posts and things like that. How do we mine all that for value? And I think we're headed into, it's still early days. There's a lot of pioneering work that's being done, but that's an area that I think is just fascinating to me, and one that I think everybody should be paying close attention to is, AI, it's not just Terminator. It's not Skynet that's going to come and, kill us all in our sleep. There's some really interesting and I think valuable work being done when you can deploy AI. And I was just going to go back again a little bit to this crash accountability. I know, Tom, you've been a real leader in the autonomous vehicle world. You've been very involved in that since the beginning, and that's another area that kind of ties in my mind, like that's AI, like the ability for vehicles to move as we move along this range of, the different levels of autonomy that we've decided we use to define that. As we move towards that level 5, the fully autonomous vehicle, I think that's coming faster than people think. I happen to be a believer that when that technology proves out and the economics behind that are so powerful, I think we're going to move as a society, the trucking and outside of trucking, to more autonomy faster. How do you now deal with that in a world of crashes and insurance and lawsuits and all the things going on? And that's why, again, I think, categorizing things as they exist today limits us as this world really moves quickly to new technologies that we don't even know that what they look like today.
Well, yeah, and I think that that's one thing that the industry really kind of struggles with is how do you've got all this data out there and you collect it, and how do you use it differently than you've ever used before? And, that was one of the things that we put, EOBRs on our trucks back in the day, right? We were still looking at miles per gallon. I'm like, you don't even need a computer to figure that out. You can do that on a pen, with a pen and a piece of paper every time you fill up the tank. I mean, that's not a difficult calculation, but you're 100% correct. Now we're outside the bounds of anything that we've ever seen before. You think about, the cameras and, in-cab cameras, and what data does that provide? And from that side of it, and customers' interactions with your website and searches on the web about trucking, and what's that impact? It's truly amazing the volume of data that's going to start coming at us so quickly.
Right. And it's an unfortunate fact, Tom, that, we might say, well, look, I'm running a great company here, and I don't know that I need to get into all that data. Well, the problem is there are those who are getting into that data who are not your friend. And, we've seen recently some of the work out of, groups like ATRI that have done some research on these so-called nuclear verdicts, the rising jury awards, things like that are very troubling. And I'll tell you, the plaintiff side of the equation is definitely looking at this data and will use it against you if you do not understand it and know how to counter the claims they'll be making. So, I really think as another brick in the wall of the defense around our trucking companies, it's you can't ignore this, where data is going. All the stuff that you have to do. You have to demonstrate good hiring practices and adherence to the FMCSRs and all those things that make for a good, strong, culture of safety that you can use as a defense. But if you're not wrapping really good data analytics around that, it's going to be used against you, I'm afraid.
Without question. And, that's kind of one of the interesting parts about the way the plaintiff's attorneys work, is they look for anything that you've done outside of the norms of the business operation in those industries. And as these things become the norms and companies start implementing these, the question of why didn't you do this becomes an undefensible one, and it becomes it's definitely an interesting time. So
and it ties back to, again, that kind of that hero status we talked about. I think that's a big part of the defense. If we can raise the image of the industry, which it has been, there's no doubt about it. The image of trucking. I mean, you still can drive around on the freeway and see signs on overpasses thanking the truckers, right? So that is a huge piece of what I think we've all been striving for. Again, I just hope we can keep it, because that's where these plaintiffs win, is they just scare the daylights out of these juries. They convince them that we're all operating these evil, awful companies and we don't care about safety, which is just the furthest thing from the truth. But that's how they win these crazy, huge awards, is fear.
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, and that has been one of the great things that's come out of the coronavirus pandemic is, hopefully we recruit a whole new group of drivers, and we recruit people who understand the industry a little better, and the public understands the industry better. So that's definitely something that's there. For the viewers, we're kind of winding down right now. So if you have any questions for Steve, please feel free to throw those in the Q&A section. And Steve, give us a little teaser about what you're going to be talking about at the 2020 OTA Annual Conference presented by Pilot Flying J.
Tom, I'm going to be so excited to be live in front of a group of people again. I don't know. I might be speechless. I might just stand there stunned, and not know what to say. No, I think what we'll do, we'll have a lot of fun. So I'm really, again, looking forward to it. But I think what we'll do, because of the presentation setting, I'll have some PowerPoints. Everybody loves those. But we'll have some data. We'll dig into this, some of this roadside inspection data and its impact on CSA. I'll have a little bit to talk about there. I think should be interesting to folks. Again, just as this data has drained out of the system, maybe it'll start to come back. I hope it does. But, as we see that happen, everybody needs to be prepared to talk to their customers, their insurance companies, et cetera, about what the impact of them is on this absence of data. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I think I'm going to put in, I've got some things, some thought-provoking, fun examples of AI and where that's going, both in and out of the trucking industry. I think that people might find interesting, and we can. I think just AI and just some examples and deeper dives into the current state of data and strategies for how we can deal with that. That's I think where my time at the live conference will be focused. I super look forward to that.
Well, Steve, we're definitely looking forward to it as well, and it's always great to hear from you and the perspectives that you have, bringing that software development side and the big data side is just invaluable. So we're very much looking forward to it. Well, Steve, thank you again for being our guest on OTA on the Air, and we look forward to seeing you here in a few weeks at the 2020 Annual Conference presented by Pilot Flying J right here in Columbus, Ohio on September 21st and 22nd. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tom. Look forward to it.